What's up, guys? It's Daniel Tejada here from Straight Up Growth. I have on here Matthew from Copper Compressions. He's a growth strategy of operations. I also like to think of him as my counterpart on the machine learning side of things when it comes to Amazon. Matthew, thanks for coming on board here today.
Yeah, I like to consider myself the soda to Daniel's scotch. We have
Hey,
scotch
I'll
and
take
soda
it.
together advertising there. So
I love it. But yeah, we're really excited to have Matthew on board today. Matthew, why don't you just give us a quick kind of rundown on sort of what you do right now, and then we'll kind of jump into some fun stuff from there.
sure. In a past life, I was a teacher in South Korea, and made a jump over to Amazon. Started my own brand back in the day. Moved back to the States, and was continuing with my own brand, but got hired on by a friend who had started a brand, and really fell into that a lot more. My own brand has died off. It just didn't get the attention. I really wasn't as driven with my own stuff as I was with other people's for whatever reason. So I really dove in and helped build up a brand called Copper Compression that was started by a friend, really bootstrapped. When I came on, I was the first full-time employee outside of the two owners. We have a wonderful virtual assistant in the Philippines. We grew from there, and it was fantastic, and been existing in the space since about 2016 with Copper Compression for that whole time. I started my own brand about 2015, and have evolved into a role from wearing a lot of hats. Back in the day, you could see these hands photoshopped with some of the old products on, and my wife was included on some of the product listings. So the whole gambit of wearing a ton of hats, to a point where we got acquired by a company based out of Manhattan in July 2019. And then I started focusing a lot more on really what my strengths were and what my areas of learned expertise was. That was the great thing about Amazon. I didn't know anything coming in. And then back to the old, the Jungle Scout days and learning, watching the YouTube videos and getting in there and trial by error. I don't know any other way to really go about it. There's no knowledge base that can supplant actually going in and doing it yourself and being awake at 4 a.m. because you screwed something up and you got to fix it up. So going through all those processes, getting through to a place now where I really focus on one of my main driving factors is talking to Amazon and saying, give me any beta you can. I want to be involved in any beta. So it's evolved into a lot more for the growth strategies and operations too. How do we not only refine what we're doing, but how do we get into these new areas? How do we feel which way the wind is blowing from the Amazon gods and set our sails in that direction, really try and capitalize on that.
That's awesome. And there's so much to unpack, like through all the things you said here. I want to start with the first piece. You mentioned you were employee number one, right? At that, when you first started. I also came from a background where I worked at one of the earliest authorized Amazon sellers called Quiver, and I was employee number 7 there. And the wearing a lot of hats, I think there's a lot of advantages to it, but it's not always the easiest thing to do. So I'm curious, like, how'd you feel about that experience? Do you think that ultimately, was fruitful for you in the long run, or do you think it took away from where you would have been if you joined a larger team early on?
Absolutely. It would be a liberal arts education at the University of Amazon, which is great. Spread me wide and get me involved in everything. So it is really wonderful now because it does develop in being in touch with all of them. Sometimes I have not sometimes, quite often, I have the intuition about Amazon that I can't really pinpoint the decision-making process that has led me to that. I just know I've experienced it enough. I can feel which way things are going. So I very much enjoyed it. I had a boss that was really, really hard driving. It was one of the best experiences in my life to work for somebody that was very difficult to work within those expectations because there were a lot of hats and they all had to look nice. Juggling hats is not an easy thing to do when there's 20 in there. So it really was trial by fire. And I think that accelerated the learning curve in a way that if I was just focused on one thing, trying to do it and not having the holistic experience of touching in all these different elements of Amazon, I don't think it would have led me to the very specific expertise that I have now. And again, it does come from the nuance of just things kind of happen, and I can see them from very quick to changing thousands of PPC bids a day just by looking and going to high level strategies like we talk about with the machine learning and what are we seeing that's not there? How can we manipulate what is there to get these outcomes that we might expect and failing forward along the way? and trying to be ambitious about what we're trying to gather there. I don't think I could be as productive in those really high level areas if I didn't start in the frontline trenches and continue to exist in those. I still very much am involved in daily interactions of bids, even down to that level, along with the newest betas that Amazon's offering, and what's that going to mean for us 5 years from now.
I think that's really something that I find similar as well. Like, I think I tell people to look to become a domain expert in at least one thing, right, of your life. Even if it's like, once you have a domain expertise, one, nobody can take that away from you, but two, it does allow you, I think, to learn faster once you have that first domain expertise. There's a theory of learning on, like, once you have it, your neurons actually like make better faster pathways where knowledge dissemination is actually a little bit quicker. But I think the first piece, like that general liberal arts education, like that's something that I know on my end I had as well, right? I was in charge of advertising, but we touched everything, right? Like buy box, items crapping out, like even sometimes we'd have to go into the warehouse and physically pack a couple boxes to make an FBA shipment. And it's a lot of those little things in terms of how they connect to our main role, right? I think is really important. And it's things that people don't think about, but those little nuances really do, they're not going to apply for every account and they're not going to apply for every single day, but it's like, oh, right, I remember I had this problem 4 years ago with this particular instance. Now I know how to solve it, right? Because like you said, it's almost like trial through mistakes, right? I learn a lot more from my things that didn't go well than I do when things go well, right? When things go well, you're going to maintain that status quo, but ultimately, it's those mistakes or those errors that have happened. Like, I don't know if you remember back in the day, like when you used to pause an Amazon ad campaign, you'd see like another 10% lift in spend that would happen after you pause the campaigns, right? It's like little things like that you didn't think about back in the day, but once they happen once, you're like, okay, got in trouble. Now I know how to deal with this for the future.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that very much too. I would say my personal life, where I've really built out consistency, is a central focus to who I am, where as a father, who I am as a son and a friend, all of that applies to what I've learned in Amazon, and kind of not kind of, but really having that true north that all these other disciplines flow into a consistency where, just as you said, you learn that pausing technique by paying attention. And consistently paying attention in whatever you do, I believe is necessary to get to the level where you can have the creative thought that goes with it. When things are going well, it's really easy to take that step back and just let them run. And you're really not in the trenches seeing what's going on. Staying gritty when things are going well, I think, is what we've done pretty well in pushing each other towards. Like, things are going really good. What else can we look at? Where else can we fail something? Where else can we try something? And I think that is a technique that takes practice and refinement and courage to go in, because it sure is nice to just step away sometimes and be like, okay, it's running good. And we have been through that process. Actually, your company, Sug, was a great disruptor in that, because from my point of view, hey, we were doing, why would we need to do any better? But I didn't have the broad scope of what was going on. I really wasn't paying attention to more than really my general focus. And it was a great disruptor on that. And that being uncomfortable and fighting through that and continuing to show up, even when I didn't understand, asking the questions, trying those things out, led to really a renaissance of understanding where there's not a lot of plateaus. We don't stick on plateaus very much anymore. We're mostly going up, but those little downs are such effective learning points because we're paying attention ultimately.
And I love how simple you phrase that, just paying attention. It seems to be that, like, I mean, we audit a couple hundred accounts a year, right? So I see a lot of things that come through. Some brands are growing, some are flat, and then they're here because they weren't paying attention, right? And they've reached that point where they had growth, things were changing, but they weren't changing either, right? And I think that's really one of the things that's fundamentally important, for ultimately running a business, is understanding that we're not in a picture frame of anything. And every day is just a snapshot of what's going to happen in the future, but things do in fact change. Like, I'll say, even for us, like, we run an Amazon agency where we have a really great strategy from a PPC perspective, but I also know that the reason we're here is because other agencies slept on trying to look for new innovative ways to do things, right? When I first started, and this I'm sure as well, when you first started, Amazon cost per click bids used to be like 5 cents a click. right? And so when CPCs are 5 cents a click, it's pretty easy to have a good ACoS on most search terms because it's just a basic math problem. But as things get more competitive, right, things change. It's not so easy to just like instantly have the cost per click bids that you have, right? You need to have some higher level of kind of overall strategy to get things going. One thing I did want to just touch on that you mentioned, I think coming from someone that has a lot of experience, right? And you guys, as you mentioned, we're already in a really good place, right? When we first engaged together, I think one of the tricky parts people have sometimes is like they become an expert, but then they start to not want to listen, right? And so to other folks there, because it's like their strategy works. How do you stay, use the word humble enough to understand that even though with your knowledge that you have, right, what allows you to be able to still take other people's inputs, right, or at least factor them in or give them a shot, in terms of your decision making processes as a business,
Sure. There's the first step of just entertaining the idea and being pliable enough with your thought process, being like, okay, this is a new idea. What could I use? How could I massage it and build it into what I'm already using? So that plasticity of forming to what the new stuff coming is really important, but staying hard and true to the core of what you know is important. The step that took the disruption caused by straight up growth coming into it really shook the core of the foundations that I had built on that. And that took trust. It took a lot of trust. It did take personal relationships. It took knowing that allies are showing up consistently, thoughtfully, in a way where I don't have to have control of everything going through. Okay, I can start relinquishing a little control too. Even at a point right now, I think our relationship with your company would run just fine if I stepped away. Just fine. I trust down to, yes, our tech, who's actually changing everything and doing our scheduling, and Meredith, who's doing a lot of the coordinating with this. They know our brand so much that I turn to them for non-advertising things. So much I turn to them for general life advice sometimes even, but anything related to Amazon was really built up through that trust. But that was a very hard first step to get through. So it was slow. It was hand holding. It was, hey, here's this new idea that really breaks the paradigm where you've existed in PPC, specifically how, like I mentioned before, changing 1,000, 3,000 bids a day based on this became a formulaic, boom, 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 I could do it. And it broke that. That's what I had trained myself on for a really, really long time. So it was a very hard thing to have my handheld go through that. And I think that dynamic of the relationship was good because it was approached. Here's where you're at. Here's our idea. Let's find where they overlap. Let's not break the system and just go over let's ease over into that way. And that relinquishing of control in those ones really led to a really nice overlap, where to even recently, a few months ago, I went back into the ACoS KPI that I've just been training. I was like, nope, we got to do this. Profitability right now is okay. You're losing some focus of market share. You're losing focus of what we're building up to fourth quarter. And our support was very gracious in that. Great. We respect you as a client. Go ahead. We'll make these changes along with what you say. Here's what we expect to see. Here's what we expect to see if we saw it this way. And a few 60 days later, I was eating crow, and I love crow pie. I'm happy to eat crow pie because it means I'm learning and pushing on those other ones and still breaking the ideas behind it, where we saw a fantastic October. We're just reviewing our numbers in the team meeting today, and it following what was suggested to us in that time, these investments and being really smart about it. Where are the conversions at? Where are the keywords that really, really matter? How are they driving tacos, not ACoS? Like these really important, broader scope things that sometimes my blinders get in takes trust and the working together of, okay, like we think it's a mistake. We would do it this way, but we'll allow you to go down that and we will pivot and move back from that. So that's a very, very difficult thing to go through, a very hand-holding thing. And it takes for me, it takes consistent contact, and I'm consistently in contact with the support team over there.
I think there's, it's a really great story that I think says a lot, right? And I think one of the biggest takeaways from this is that it's really constantly being active on what's going on, right? So like, you brought on a strategy, you tested it out, and you still had that moment of where, okay, I'm going to fall back to the OG thing, right? But what I think is really valuable there is that you're still not just, I'm going to fall back to this and this is it. You're still evaluating it in a non-biased way, where you're like, let me actually measure the performance of both pieces, right? And then start to like work towards that. I think the other piece is, I think brands get scared sometimes because it's like, oh, it's either this way or that way, right? But it's not always that, right? Nothing is usually that rigid, right? Ideally, I think running a business is a flexible situation. We can do all the planning and forecasting, and create the best game plan ever, but things break, right? I mean, Amazon just halved everyone's inventory in Seller Central for Q4, right? Like that's not something that most people plan for, but we have to figure out what a pivot is, right? To make sure that we can hit those effectively. And I think the brands that ultimately last the longest and go the furthest are the ones that they are experimenting all the time, right? They really never stop there, because they're always looking to see how they can improve. And like you said, sometimes it doesn't work. And I think also recognizing when it's not executed the way that you'd like it to be, interpreting that data and then making decisions to fix it, right? Versus trying to make an excuse for, oh, this didn't work because of, whatever, type of thing.
Right. Yeah. It's a evolutionary marketplace, and it's the power of natural selection versus artificial selection.
Yeah.
Natural selection will give you a divergence over billions of years. Artificial selection will give you all the breeds of dogs we have from a wolf 100,000 years ago. Paying attention, trying, cutting out the other ones, and formulating it that way allows it to be a more precise evolution to really what you want to, but it doesn't remove the hardships that you're going to face. It doesn't remove the changes to the environment. It doesn't remove recessions. It doesn't remove all of that, but it certainly is consistent with trying things out and fighting this war instead of the previous war with the actions that we're taking, learning and being informed by the previous things that we did, but recognizing that things have evolved. So the same answer might not work this time that it worked last time. The only way to get through that is trying out the other ones, being hybrid, pulling different things in, and that takes time and attention ultimately.
No, I totally agree. I've got a question. So, given where you're at now, is there any advice you would have given your younger self when you were first getting started on this Amazon train here that you wish you did differently?
Yeah. I give kudos to myself for allowing my teeth to get kicked in. It's hard. It's a really hard thing to do, and it's a humbling experience. Coming from a place, as I said, in a previous life, I was a teacher, and I was a head teacher, and I ran my own business, and I got to dictate all that. And coming in and having to humble myself, not only to a demanding boss in that, but to, man, I just got to grind this out. I have to really allow myself to sink into all these things and let them penetrate my mind from 100 different ways. So I think if I could give myself advice on that, I would say, don't fight against it as much as you did. But that's a really hard thing to do because you learn through going through it, and that the inner feeling of, I want to quit, but I'm going to stick with it. That builds up the grit too. That I think is really, really necessary. But if I was a wiser man, I would have stayed early on consistent. That made the difference. That made the difference really from, again, I go back to when I was changing a couple of thousands of bits a day. That came from consistency. That came from a mistake. It came from a $5,000 mistake over 2 days that I had to report back to the boss that I didn't have to report. I could have pushed it under the rug. It wouldn't have been noticed. It would have been okay. But calling out on that, being like, here's what it is. And that forced my hand to finally saying, okay, I got to put this on my calendar. I got to stay consistent. This is the foundation. And then other things can fill in from there of what really needs attention. So now as I check in daily, I tell my boss now, I say, how many hours you work in a week? I'm like, it doesn't matter. You don't want to put me in that box, because once you put me in that box, I'm not working 7 days a week, because I'm working 7 days a week right now. And when I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about it. But you put me in that box, and then I'm going to not want to be in that box at some point. So, and that takes consistency. It takes my tabs open, I think about 18 or 19 tabs every day right when I log in. And that nuance that you start to pick up for it, I'm picking up data points that I'm not particularly focusing on when for the deep dive, just because the consistency of it coming in. So recognizing what are those important things that I want to really build on and gain that not just overall knowledge for, but again, the intuition for how this interacts with the other ones, and just looking at them, not even diving deeper all the time. It's just being exposed to them on a consistent basis. So I think if I would have done that on day one, my learning curve even goes quicker than it did.
I think that's really, really great input there. I know for myself, I think I probably have slightly different advice for myself, but because I was really good about being consistent about the one, that was the one thing I had. My structure was they put me in charge of advertising on Amazon when it first launched, right? And there was plenty of money coming in from just selling on Amazon. So for us, it was kind of like, I remember asking my boss after like 3 weeks, I kept asking him, all these questions, like, how do I do this, all that. And then one day he's like, honestly, you already know more than I do at this point. It's your role, right? You run with it, you make the decisions here. And so the one thing I will say I did well was I put all my time and energy into trying to like just learn, right? And really soak up all the information I could. So I was like looking on YouTube, I was looking on Google searches. Like, I think one thing that some people do, but I don't think they do as well as they could, is you can teach yourself almost anything, right? We live in an era where information is literally in the palm of your hand. Like your phone can pretty much figure out anything. And then it's one, the knowledge will give you a baseline, but it's the practice, right, that ultimately makes you an expert and really hits the learning piece. So being consistent, being able to take a kick to the teeth, like you mentioned, I think is important too, and not to get discouraged because you're incorrect. Like I tell my team, be happy when you make that mistake, right? As long as you're learning from that mistake and okay, I overspent on this campaign, I'm not going to make this mistake again because I've had it happen, right? Because of this circumstance.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. I think that's really important too. And this is a carryover from my personal life, accountability for those type of things. Sharing that type of vulnerability with my boss in that particular situation not only established a trust relationship for us, but gave me a safe space to make mistakes and say it's okay. So even having that with a different ally, even it's not someone you're working with, be like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I made this mistake. I'm feeling guilty because whatever it is to approach where we're at, I think allows us to do a heck of a better job of making decisions at 70 or 80% instead of trying to get up to the 95 or 100%. And again, failing forward because it's okay to do that. And my experience with other folks I've talked to and myself is that's what pushes forward. In Silicon Valley, it's if you're not failing big enough, you're simply not ambitious enough. And I'm not on that level, and I appreciate where it's coming from. But going there, be like, okay, if I'm not trying out something new, then I'm sitting back, I'm flatlining, I'm just on that plateau. So let's try something out new, and to build that trust with not only other people but trusting myself, forgiving myself in those situations, not just asking for forgiveness. That really leads to a comfortability where it's okay. Not only okay, as you said, it's encouraged to make mistakes. It is a wonderful thing to be thankful about it, because that $5,000 mistake I talked about 2 days before, that was the best mistake I made in my professional career, maybe. And I've made some pretty big ones, but that one was what moved the needle to consistency, which has really made a change in my life, both professionally and personally.
I think that's just huge, just great advice there. I think one question I'd have for you, like you've got your kids, right? You're working for US brand and you're working abroad there, you've got different time zones. How do you balance all that there? I know like you're super in the weeds, and when it comes to Amazon, I know it's something you're thinking about on a daily basis. How do you have space for everything else?
Yeah, sure. My first call this morning was 3 a.m. Korean Standard Time for our 2 p.m. Eastern call. And then I had a reference call after that and talking to him, and it was 6 in the morning Korean that time. He's like, I don't think I could do that. How do you do that? I what I really do is listen to my body. I take a nap about every day. If I wake up early, I wake up, and I do wake up often. I set my alarm at 2 a.m. this morning as of the 1:50. My body has changed, and it knows that it's coming because I have a practice that I go into, and my body knows that. My mind will say, go back to sleep. My body will say, I'm awake. I'm honoring you by doing this. So go into it, and then it sets it up. So I've been awake it's 8:35 a.m. and I've been awake for 6.5 hours now. And I'm on fire. It feels really, really good. So personally, that's how I handle it. I don't fight against what my body's telling me, and I do honor my body with movement every day, and stillness and silence and good food. So that keeps me healthy, where I can flow where I need to in that. And working with other people, it is difficult coordinating times for calls. It is There is a nice balance of being overseas that my phone doesn't ring all day. So I am quite productive. So if that production comes at 2 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 2 a.m., it's okay. That has been difficult in times, but I think also when skillfully done, allowed to draw boundaries and say, hey, here's what I do. We need clear communication in a short amount of time. I need direction. Here's my feedback. Let's go from there. And that leads to not having, we do have set time for just brainstorming and just going off the wall, but direct communication and driving down the wasted meeting time. It's a really big thing. The wasting time on the phone, the hemming and hawing and going off agenda. I'm very good about, for each of my calls, I have an agenda that is live and it's updated throughout the week before we have our weekly calls. So that's where we're going back to. It's a reference point. And that keeps us really on point and allows me to know what I'm doing when I can't get in touch with somebody, and also allows the people that I'm providing stuff with or asking for to be clear and something to reference back to when I might not be available during that time.
I like that. I really like the agenda piece, because it does create some structure, right, and some organization, so things don't slip through the cracks, right, given the fact that you may not have the most conducive situation to like communicating with someone out here, but you're going to make sure that you're probably even more on point than someone that is out here as well, right? In that case.
Right. I would argue that's the case. That's been my experience with it. And Meredith has been wonderful at adopting that also. We have an ongoing one for our, and I just throw something up on there. And when we do our review for it, we know exactly where we're at and what we need to talk about for the coming 2-week check-in call. So it has been very useful for that. And I have had experience both in company and out of company where it's an hour spent together. And that was a 10-minute meeting. That was actionable for 10 minutes with me. And that other 50 minutes, you would rather have me bored and allowing things to just formulate in my mind and things, and not avoiding what I'm doing, but I'm not checked in just for an hour of doing that. When I do that, that's kind of like the box again. For me personally, as an independent person, when I put inside of that box, I'm in the box or out of the box. When that box is not there, I'm a responsible, skillful, talented person in my area, and then other things fall in there. So I might be shooting baskets with my 10-year-old and think, oh, that's the solution I was looking for. Or, oh, hey, let's try this out, because there's no box. It just kind of sees everything. So it's a balance. It's really important.
You really just hit a vein that I think is really strong there, like that. I'm not necessarily a believer in like the traditional like 9 to 5 working hour type of schedule thing. Like I'm more on the plane that you are, where it's like when you're like listening to your body or listening to your brain, like I know when I'm tired and I'm going to meetings, I'm not there, right? It's just like, it's not the same amount of time versus there's times like, I went out with, got this guy, Alex, on my team, and my brother, Marco, and we played golf, right? Not talking about work at all, went out, got drinks, whole thing. And then like later that night, all of a sudden we had some like epiphany moments, right? And it's just like casually, like some of the best ideas we've come up with in terms of like some of the operational things just came from like a casual just hang, not necessarily being in that place. But I feel like some of my best ideas, like when I started doing ranking, I was at a concert there, and I literally had this theory on like, what if I started ranking, or what if I tried to buy my SEO? It was with this brand, Suavecito pomade. And then this was back in 2016, so it was really cheap. Spent like $200, and all of a sudden I'm the #1 organic ranking product for the term pomade. I'm like, this is an interesting vein, right? And then just kept testing it, and ultimately, $1 billion later, right here we are. But it's that not in the box time that actually really allowed me to get some of the best ideas going.
Right. Do you remember what concert it was?
I do. It was this Zoo concert. It was in LA. Zoo's this DJ artist, whatever, that I really like. And I was literally thinking to myself, like, I appreciate when people just do themselves, right? And they're very authentic. And they just do kind of a version of themselves. And like, ultimately he figured out a way to monetize something that he came up with on his own. And so kind of through that kind of stimulated like, what can I come up with on my own, right? Because most of what I had been doing from a Amazon perspective, I'm basically just regurgitating what I saw on YouTube or Seller Locker, or Seller Labs and The Amazing Seller and all those, resources. But one of the things, if you're doing the same thing as everybody else, eventually there's that thing doesn't work as well because everybody else does it, right? It's like when Facebook ads first launched, it was the guys that really blew up or the guys that were on there early, right? For me, I jumped to Amazon ads because they said, do you want to be the first person to do Amazon ads? I got excited about first, but it's what you do with it from there, right? It's that innovation piece. But yeah, I do remember the moment at this concert. I do a lot of things. I quit my job at a concert one time. Decided I have my epiphany on that. I didn't quit live, but I mentally decided I needed to leave a job at one of those things.
Wow. I wonder what you're gonna do when we get you to Burning Man, bro. Watch out.
We're gonna call Straight Up X, and that'll be our rocket ship company.
Straight Up X.
Oh man. Well, cool. Well, Matthew, I've been super appreciative of the time today. I think this was really, really fun, kind of learning your story, learning what has allowed you to see such success, at this point in your life. Here, any sort of last pieces of advice you have for someone as we let you go, before we let you go?
Yeah, I think a difficult thing for people coming in is finding allies and talking to them and be vulnerable. If you're putting in the work on your side, there are people who are out there to help you. If you're looking for someone else to carry your load for you, put your work for you, don't. You're doing your work on your side and you call out to me and I see that, I'll help you if I don't know you. And there's a lot of good people who do that out there, but it does require your grit, your showing up and doing that. But finding that tribe and people to talk to the way that Daniel and I can talk to each other, it is invigorating. And as you can see, we're enthusiastic, and enthusiasm is contagious. An unrefined, enthusiastic person who's showing up is better to me than an MBA who just came out of one of the top schools. Give me that enthusiasm. Give me somebody who wants to show up and do that work, because we're gonna have a lot more fun. And it really is fun. Being at a concert, I love cool nerds, and you're such a cool nerd, dude, that you're at the show and thinking about this technically while you're grooving to a DJ and a visual show that you like for it. And that is, I think, a balance that can be found, but it has to be tried out. It's not linear. It's not a step-by-step type thing. And I think the way that we take those steps, both for personal growth and professional growth in a healthy way that doesn't get things out of balance, is finding other allies who we can do that with and we can hold ourselves accountable to, and both professional and personally, to have people, specifically I talk to, that are, hey, you did this, well, you said you were going to do this. It's not, hey, I told you to do this. And so you've been led. What did you say you were going to do? Did you do it? Did you stick with that? And I have found those both personally and professionally, where that has led to immense amounts of growth, to have that accountability and really find my tribe around it. We're excited about it. We're excited to fail together. We're excited to sell together. We're excited to succeed together. It just brings a levity to everything, because it really is digging trenches and sometimes being in a foxhole on the front line with bombs falling everywhere. That can actually be an enjoyable experience if you got the right person next to you. So reach out and find those people.
It's incredible advice. I know it's something I myself have definitely experienced. Like even when I first started, I went to every networking event I could, right? And I'd go by myself, and it's awkward, right? You're sitting there, and I was like 21 years old, and I'm super excited about this Amazon thing that nobody else cares about. But eventually I found people that cared about it, right? And gave me the right input that did give me good advice for down the line. And it's like, dealing with someone like Matthew, it's fun talking to someone that cares, right? It is actively, as passionate about this as I am, right? We may have different opinions from time to time, and it's not like we're not gonna say that I think we should do this or whatever, but it's the fact that we both care so much that really makes it, a fun experience together. So
I agree
yeah.
very much.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Definitely, reach out to Matthew here. You can find him on LinkedIn. He's a super awesome guy. He also lives in Korea, which is crazy. Doing some wild stuff there. But yeah, really, really awesome people. Thank you so much for coming on today, and have a good day.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing you on the mini golf course next time, my friend. I'm going to win some of my money back.
Oof, man, your son's gonna keep taking my money. Watch out.
All right, Daniel. Thanks, bro.
Later.
Bye bye.